Lieutenant Loverlady.
If you're here just to learn about the Dex rework in a TLDR format, then I got you covered. The Dexterity rework affects weapon durability now, meaning if you have low Dexterity, like 2 to 5 for example, you'll lose your weapon earlier than before the rework. 7 to 9 Dexterity means you'll keep your weapon longer than before the rework. And 6 Dexterity is the basic middle ground, where you won't feel any difference in weapon durability. Though you can apply this to every legend and make decisions for yourself on how these changes affect your legends, I'm gonna briefly go over every single legend in the game, unscripted, and give my personal thoughts on whether the legend was buffed or nerfed. Otherwise, if you just wanted to know what the rework did, then you can leave now, but like the video please, because it helps out the channel a whole bunch. Besides that, let's get moving. Going completely unscripted now, the first legend is Brawlhalla, and I feel like he's really not affected by the Dexterity changes at all. Obviously, if you run something like Strength, you're going to be going down on Dex, but if you run Dex, then you're going to be going down on Defense. Not a terrible change. Personally, I'm choosing base stance because it leaves everything perfectly the same. Unless you want to go for less weapon durability in exchange for more strength. Either really works. So, Brawlhalla isn't too affected by it. Now, Cassidy. Cassidy has a whopping 8 Dexterity. You can go into 9 Dexterity, which is personally what I'm doing. You can be so aggressive with this. This is definitely a buff for Cassidy, and Cassidy was already a really, really strong legend. You could run into it, but honestly, if you want more defense in exchange for the Dexterity, you still have a higher than average dex. You're going to be keeping your weapon longer than you were before. So you could really do anything with this. Run into dex, run out of it, even go base stance if you want to, or something else. It's up to you, really. Orion also isn't too affected by the changes. You could run into dex down on speed, which is personally what I am probably going to do for Orion, just to make him feel a little more unique to me. You know, you're losing your weapon around the same area. Orion isn't super affected by it. Lord of Rax is really affected by it, on the other hand. I mean, you can run 9 dex for downlay Insig on Lance, even though Lance got completely gutted this patch. Still a fantastic combo. It might even be one of your killing moves, since Neutralite kills earlier than Sair now. But overall, this is a buff for Lord Rax. You can be so aggressive with blasters and just keep people on their feet constantly while making sure you still have weapon almost the entire time. Now, Nash. Nash really hurts from this, because if you run into Dexterity, you're going down on Strength, and he already has a pretty good amount of Strength, so you could do this if you want to. If you're running into Defense stance, you're going really low on Dex, and that could be really bad for Nash. So if you are a Nash main, like the 1 out of 5 of you out there who play Nash, or if your name's defensive, then you're gonna be having a much harder time keeping your weapon. It's basically a nerf for Nash, which sucks because he hasn't always been a very good legend. But up next, we got Queen Nai. Queen Nai hurts especially because if you run into Dexterity, you're running 2 speed. Absolutely don't do that. I think speed stance is still the best stance for Nai. You're going to be losing your weapon a little earlier than normal, but I still think Nai is going to be all right. It does affect her negatively, but I think overall she'll be okay. Hattori has base Dexterity. Interesting. A lot of these I kind of forget how much Dexterity they have. So a lot of these are going to be surprises to me. I mean, what takes out of Dexterity? Like, you could run 9 speed. 9 speed, personally, for me, is overkill. But going into Dexterity also kind of affects you negatively. So really, base stance could work. You could just run defense out of speed. That's a perfectly fine stance as well. Really, Hattori doesn't feel too affected by this in a positive or negative way, I would say. Sir Roland. Let's see. Like, you could run up on Dex. He doesn't have too much strength, but he does have signatures that kill really early. So if you want to kill early, you don't have to worry too much about strength on him. But having to run Dexterity just to have the neutral amount of like weapon durability, not entirely sure it's worth it, because you can run defense stance and that lowers you even further. It might be a worthy trade-off, but I think it only slightly nerfs Sir Roland, I would say. We also have Scarlet. She has 5 Dexterity, and that's the same as Sir Roland, actually. Very similar legends. If you're running defense stance, which is a pretty good stance, honestly, for Scarlet, then you're going down on Dexterity, less weapon durability. It's only a slight nerf for Scarlet, but don't run Dexterity stance because you're going 3 speed, and 3 speed Hammer Lance sounds like hell. I think Scarlet mains will be fine. It's only a slight nerf, but Lance overall got gutted, so that's a story of its own, but with the Dexterity rework, Scarlet should be fine. Thatch also sitting around the mid area, but he also has 2 really good weapon combos. Sword is really good, and blasters are super oppressive. You can really push down on people, but 2 defense, not worth it though, at all. If anything, I think, let's see. High strength is really good in exchange for losing your weapon more often. I think that's a fine trade. Just because of how strong of a legend Thatch can be. He is negatively affected by it, but not by too much, once again. We have Ada. She has 7 dexterity. She is really crazy on dex. Even if you go defense stance and take out of it, you're still at the base amount of dex. And not only that, but you also get Sarah Neutralite true on spear still. I think this one's also okay. Surprisingly enough, it actually buffs Ada. Ada was already a very strong legend, and I'm kind of terrified to see how much this is going to buff her even further, because hell, I would run into dexterity stance. This is a very, very good stance, actually. Just make sure to check audio levels and all that. It's a buff for Ada. Ada gets the buff. She's a very, very strong legend. Sentinel, wow. Okay, Sentinel is getting a bit nerfed from this. If you run into dexterity, you're just a bit under the base threshold for it, I believe. You're at 5.566. Not a bad stat lineup, really. It's really not a bad stat lineup. Running strength would be a really bad move because it leaves you at 3 dex, and 3 dex is a really low amount. I would say Sentinel is pretty negatively affected by this, despite having a really nice weapon combo, good stats. But it makes you have to think about, like, a lot more about what your stance is for Sentinel, I would say. So I would say he's more negatively affected by it than Sir Roland or Scarlet, for example. And Lucian's also negatively affected by it. And surprisingly enough, I don't know, dexterity stance is not a very good one for him. 2 attack is really, really low. But you also don't want to be running defense because then you're going to be losing your weapon a lot. But high defense and high speed also aren't bad. It's blasters, it's guitars. You can really push onto your opponents and make sure they aren't keeping their weapons. And if you're swapping out your weapons consistently, then the dex rework doesn't really even matter in general. That's a really important thing to keep in mind, because if you're swapping out your weapons consistently, then that means that the dexterity changes aren't really affecting you. Of course, they still affect you, but it's not as much because you're constantly swapping your weapons out. It creates a lot less one tricks, I would say. But overall, Lucian's really negatively affected by it. And so is Taros, obviously. This is a change for the better, though. You could run into dex, take out of strength. That's a perfectly fine stance to do. It's still going to leave you much, much lower, I would say. And, I mean, even if you just want to go haywire, you want to go all over the place like a madman with 2 dex, you still can. You'll just lose your weapon a lot. You have to be really careful on Taros. Brynn is not negatively affected by this at all, I would say, actually. I would actually run into dexterity stance on Brynn, because not only do you get standard neutralite on spear, but that also leaves you at the base threshold for keeping your weapon, basically. Really not a bad stance at all. This is a very, very good stance for Brynn, actually. It arguably could be one of the best ones. Unless you want to go down on the weapon durability with strength, you can. Any other stance really works, I would say. But dexterity is not a useless stance for Brynn. Nasuri gets buffed from this. I mean, even with the Suri, I would probably run it into dex stance, I would say. That's a very good stance for a Suri. Mainly because, well, she's a very quick and nimble legend. She has a lot of speed, and she can really throw your enemy around for a loop. And keeping your weapon durability during that is very important, I would say. But the other stances, yeah, you could also run down on dex. That leaves you average. Asuri overall gets buffed from this, I would say. A very nice buff for Asuri, but who knows how much that's going to really buff her for tournament play, right? Maraza is negatively affected by it. You can't really run into dex either, because then you're running 3 speed, but I also would not run down on strength. Running something like speed stance leaves you balanced, and even defense stance goes down on strength quite a lot. You have to be a lot more careful on Barraza, but this is overall a nerf for him, which maybe is good because he has axe blasters, really strong weapon combo. Ember might be in the same place, I would say. Running down on strength isn't too bad, and even if you aren't going down on strength, you still have quite a lot of dexterity. You really don't need 8 speed. I wouldn't say you even need to run down on dexterity. Defense stance or even dexterity stance could be fine if you want to just keep your weapon a little longer. It really doesn't affect Ember too much, but I'd say it's a slight buff for her, I would say. Which isn't bad, because what is it? Ember, you really don't see Ember too much. It's bow guitars, so. Then you have Azoth. Yeah, dexterity stance also not a great one. If dexterity stance ever takes out a speed, then there's a likely chance that it's probably not going to be a good stance at all. But defense stance takes you down to 4. Honestly, speed stance is also just a really solid one for keeping a balanced stat lineup if that's what you really care about. Although, if you really want to go for the balanced or average amount of weapon durability, then you could run Dex. Azoth is just slightly nerfed by this, I would say. Now, Koji. Koji is an interesting... I mean, 4 speed is not the worst. I know a lot of people prefer, like, 5 speed, maybe 6 or 7 speed, even. But, I mean, even Dexterity stance, that's perfectly fine. You pick up a weapon at 50 damage, you're keeping that for the rest, like, the rest of the stock. That's how insane these changes are, really. And even if you don't like the high Dexterity, you just want to go for something better, like defense or strength, for example, you can do that, and it keeps you above the average. So this is overall buff for Koji, which is very good. Olgrim gets mega nerfed by it, obviously. You could run Dex Stance if you wanted. It leaves him almost balanced. It's just a 6-4, 6-6 lineup. But Speed Stance also is just insane. That's 7 speed. Crazy whopping 7 speed. It's a nerf for him. Very well deserved nerf. But I wouldn't say it's going to completely gut the character, because he got a lot of nerfs. But I think he's still going to be very good. Diana's also very balanced about it. If you run into Dex, you're going lower on defense, which may not be worth it. And Speed Stance, that's a lot of speed for taking down on Dex. It's going to leave you a little lower than average. Even Strength Stance is fine. Balance Stance is actually something that I would do, I'd say. But Diana isn't too affected by the changes, I would say. And Jala. Jala is going to be a very interesting one. This is a good one because taking on the Strength, it's Axe and Sword. You still kill really, really early with Jala, no matter what. Even running into Strength, you still have 7 Dexterity, even though it's 4 speed. 4 speed isn't great. She doesn't have a lot of many great stances, but the Dexterity stance actually has become one of her better stances, I would say. So I'd say this is overall buff for Jala. Very good. We need more Jala players. Core is balanced. Running into Dex stance, like the other legends, goes down on speed. Not really too great. Even, I mean, what takes down on Dex? That's attack stance. It's a slight nerf for Core overall. And Dexterity stance isn't really worth going into because you take down on speed, and that 3 speed is really a detriment. So even doing something like balance stance, I would say, or running into speed for the balance stance, or defense if you really just want to be a tank while not keeping your strength as high, which is perfectly fine because beyond Hammer and Gauntlets, they're both some of the most gimp heavy weapons in the game, if we're not talking about like Scythe, for example. He's only slightly affected by it. It's just a slight nerf for Core. This one I'm not very happy about because Wushang is already one of the best legends in the game, and he's getting really, really buffed by this. Even if you run into Strength and you go down on Dexterity, you're keeping the base amount of durability that you have for Wushang, which I don't really like. I don't know. It would have been nice if there was a way to somehow keep him nerfed while still giving him the benefit of keeping his high weapon durability, but that would require just nerfing Gauntlets altogether. Maybe some tweaks to Spear. But Wushang's overall buffed by this. I wouldn't be surprised if he became a very solid 2s pick, which not like he wasn't already a solid 2s pick, but if he became more of a solid 2s pick because of this. Because I could even see people running into Dex if they really wanted to, or even base stance if you want. You could run into defense or speed even, but it doesn't really matter because he's always going to have a good amount of durability for his weapons. Val gets nerfed by this, definitely, because she only has 5 Dexterity. Running into Dex only, well, it brings down on Strength, and that's not too great, really. Obviously, you don't want to be running into defense stance because that takes down on Dex. You're not going to have a lot of Dex. I feel like Dex is more important for Val because of how close ranged her weapons are. But it's overall a nerf for her. Just a slight nerf, I would say. Nothing too insane for Val. Ragnar is basically balanced. He has some of the most balanced stats in the game, so running into defense stance, it's only slightly less. That's a pretty good amount of defense, and Dexterity stance, I really wouldn't say is worth it. He's not too affected by it. This is like the definition of a legend who's only ever so slightly nerfed by it, but it's such a small nerf that doesn't really matter for Ragnar. So if you main Ragnar, you're perfectly fine. Cross technically gets nerfed from this. You could run balanced stats like that. There's a lot of legends you can make balanced stats, interestingly enough. But Speed stance is also good. That's a 7-3-6-6. That's not a terrible stance. Cross does get overall nerfed by this, obviously, considering he does have 4 Dexterity. If you run Speed stance, that's 3 Dexterity, and that's not a lot. But if you can just keep people away from you with blasters, then I think you'll be perfectly fine. He is nerfed by this, but it's nothing too drastic. Cross is already a really strong legend, so I think the cross mains will be fine. We have Mirage. I wouldn't run into the Dexterity stance. That's not great. Speed stance also just isn't great. Even if you're running strength, you're only going slightly down on durability. So you could run something like even base stance is perfectly fine in my opinion, because you're still keeping your high strength. Or if you just want to go balanced out with defense, defense may be the best stance. Now, actually, would not blame you. Mirage isn't really affected by this change at all. Nyx is slightly. Taking down a strength is kind of lame. Speed stance was really good, but if you're running into speed stance now on Nyx, which was likely the best option to use before, it's not going to be as good now. It's going to be just not as good. That's the best way I can put it. But it's overall a nerf for Nyx, and I would say it's a bigger nerf than other legends. Again, I'm going to use Scarlet and Roland as an example, because they have decent stances, at least for these. Like, well, no, dexterity isn't really good. It's about the same, I would say. Like, Roland is better than Scarlet, but the problem here just lies in the stances being very strange at times. Strength into defense also works. Or if you just want to do base stance, that works perfectly fine as well. Defense stance. He's only slightly negatively affected by it, but it's pretty much fine. Mordex is going to be an interesting one, because he's always been a super strong legend, but Dexterity, or like the rework, might nerf him pretty significantly. You have, well, no, even running into Dexterity stance isn't a bad idea. He's not as negatively affected by this as I thought. But if you're running into these other stances, you only have 4 Dexterity, and that can negatively affect him really hard. So I would say it nerfs him a decent amount, but if you're running Dex stance on Mordex, then you may almost feel exactly the same playing him. Now, Yumiko. Oh boy. Yumiko is already a really strong legend. I think but Dexterity Rework is very, very good for her. She may be one of the best legends in the game now, surprisingly enough, despite having low strength and low defense. Any of the other stances just don't really feel worth it anymore. I mean, this is perfectly fine. Strength stance is actually amazing. It does not leave you balanced, but it does give you balance on your weapon durability, which is very, very good. So you could run Dex. The speed, personally, I don't think it matters. Dexterity stance is a very good stance, actually. A lot of these I'm selecting because I may actually consider running these for these legends. It's not that bad. It's a very nice, like, I'm excited for these changes with the small amount of time that I've played with them so far. Artemis, I mean, Artemis has the kill power of a semi-truck, so Dexterity stance is perfectly fine. She isn't too negatively affected by this at all. Speed stance, you really don't want to be doing. That's just too much speed, and also you're losing weapon durability for that. Defense stance is fine. Only slightly nerfed by it, but it's really not a lot. Not too noticeable. And we have Caspian. Dexterity stance is not great for Caspian, unfortunately. Which, I mean, Caspian is a really strong legend. He has some of the highest force in the game, surprisingly enough. But he's not too affected by these changes. And if you run Dexterity, you're just going to have low defense, but you will be balanced on that. Besides that, you could go balanced stat as well, or if you really want to go risky, then go down on the durability for more speed, but personally, I don't think you need that much speed. He's not too affected by it, just slightly negatively, but nothing too major. Sidra. Okay, this is one I'm glad to see has low Dexterity, because Sidra's already a really, really strong legend. People are not seemingly realizing that. Dexterity stance is okay. It puts you at just below average. She is definitely nerfed by this overall. But I mean, speed stance is a really good stance, but defense is definitely more of a detriment, I would say. If you were running defense before, then I would definitely look at your stances again and see where your options are. Especially with Dex being an option now. It's a very good option. We also have Zol. Yeah, down on speed. Not really worth it. Speed stance may just be the option, but it also could be strength. Strength is just the most fun option. And again, similarly to Sidra, you might have to look at your options again if you're running defense stance, because 3 Dexterity is really, really low. It's not a great amount. Then Kaya. Kaya got some pretty major nerfs this patch, but she also gets nerfed by the Dexterity Rework a lot. This may make her a really, really bad pick now, which is crazy because she just used to be so good, and she used to constantly be really good, and she probably will still be really good, but obviously you don't want to be running... Oh, whoops. You don't want to be running into... what is it? Strength stance? 5 strength for 3 dex. That's really not great. You're just going to be losing your weapon a lot. Even Dexterity stance, I think, is perfectly fine. You could do speed stance if you want a defense stance. It's just going down on dex is really bad. It's basically a nerf for Kaya. Not a big one, not a small one, just decently sized nerf. Then we have Kves, or Isaiah, basically. He is not too negatively affected by it. Dexterity stance is actually a pretty viable stance. You keep your weapon longer, and for a legend like Isaiah, that's really, really good. Strength stance also could be good if you want to keep your strength in exchange for a little bit of durability. Not too bad. He's not too affected by this, but the stances, I say, it'd be a slight buff for him, honestly. Jiro, this one I'm not happy about. Jiro's a really strong legend in my eyes. I know a lot of people don't think that, but that's just my opinion. He gets buffed by this, for sure. He already has some really insane combos, and he can really pressure people to keep him off weapons while keeping his at really early healths going into later healths. And speed, I don't think the speed is too important. Dexterity stance is not bad. I mean, speed stance is kind of crazy. He's overall buffed by this. If you run strength stance, you're going balanced on that, so he gets buffed overall from this. And then you have Lin Fei. Lin Fei is definitely buffed by this. I will be running 9 dex myself, personally. Very, very good. Mainly because you run down on speed. 6 speed for Lin Fei is a very, 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 very good lineup. Don't mind me, I'm just going through and setting my stuff. There'll be a Battle Pass video probably sometime in the next week. Y'all will see. But Lin Fei is very buffed by this. Cannon, Katars, or at least Katars, benefit decently from dexterity in general, but being able to keep her weapons like that and just being able to apply much more pressure with a character who has such low defense and attack, it's very good for Lin Fei. And Zario's slightly nerfed by this. Dexterity stance is once again one of those you really don't want to run into, which sucks because he has only 4 dexterity. So speed stance is a perfectly fine option, and so is strength, but dexterity and defense are really, really bad stances. Overall, Zario's pretty hurt by these changes, and especially with the nerfs that he got overall, he might not be the best 2's pick anymore. Who knows? Then you have Rayman. I'm running dex stance on Rayman because it keeps him balanced. It keeps him the same way he was before, but you're also going down on strength, and personally, I don't believe strength is a problem with Rayman, considering he has axe and gauntlets. Besides that, speed stance just seems like a lot of speed, and you're taking down the durability, which kind of hurts. But perfectly fine stances. He's slightly nerfed by it, but running dex stance, I think is perfectly fine, honestly. Not a bad stance for Rayman, and it's only a slight nerf. This is really good. Well, it's up to you if 4 speed, spear, and orb are good enough to run for you. I mean, Dusk is going to be... I mean, this is a buff for Dusk, I believe. Dexterity stance isn't the greatest, but even if you run down on dexterity, you're pretty balanced. And I mean, even something like defense stance or speed is a little psychotic, but defense stance it might just be the best stance for Dusk now. Overall buff for Dusk, which is good because I feel like Dusk buffs are always nice. You never really see people playing him, even though he just got nerfed this patch. Yikes. Ooh. Fate gets pretty nerfed by this, surprisingly enough. I never really thought about Fate having a high dexterity, surprisingly enough. If you're running speed stance, which 8 speed is a lot, that's really, really bad stance, actually. But dexterity also isn't great either. Personally, strength is probably the one I'd go with the most. But overall, a pretty big nerf for Fate, based off her stances. And same with Thor, unfortunately. The funny thing about these changes is that Dexterity Rework buffs a lot of really strong legends already and nerfs some really weak legends. But it also does it vice versa, which is really good. But I think legends will just need adjusting to that point. Dexterity stance for Thor is perfectly fine. Speed also could be good if you just want to not really care about the durability. Perfectly fine to run that. He is nerfed by this, but you do have a lot of options to change up your playstyle with his stances, which is very good. Maybe strength is the only bad one because you don't really want to play low speed Thor. That's not a very good option. All right, for Petra, also really not a bad option. You don't have too many options. It's an overall nerf because she has 4 dexterity. Even if you run it into dex out of strength, which is kind of harmful for Petra, then it's an overall nerf. But I'm not going to say you don't have options. So Petra works. Petra works. Vector is a very unfortunate case because he is pretty heavily nerfed by it. You could run into dex. Balanced Vector is surprisingly a pretty good option. But strength stance is really not good. He had really good stats before this, surprisingly, which is why it surprises me that not a lot of people played him, considering Lance, but maybe the combination of Lance Bow just wasn't very appealing to people. But he is pretty nerfed by this, unfortunately. Not a lot, because Dexterity stance is a very useful stance, I would say. It leaves him almost balanced in that case. But overall, a nerf for him. Volkov, okay. This one's interesting. 9 dexterity Volkov would be crazy. Just, I feel like speed is really important. And Scythe and Axe, you don't have to worry too much about strength on these weapons. Yeah, a lot of the time you're going to be getting Gimps, I would say, considering it's Axe and Scythe. He is very, very buffed by this. And Volkov, he's not a legend I think is OP, he's just a legend I think is annoying. So it's kind of weird to see that he's going to be very, very buffed by this, but we'll see how it turns out. If you're a Volkov player, then you can definitely praise the changes. Onyx is going to be very good because Dexterity. I mean, well, Onyx is a very good 2s legend. The 2s meta has been very, very stale for the last 7 years. Except when they introduce a new legend, and then it's just that, like Onyx or Tesca, and then they just get thrown into the mix with the already existing 2s legends that are really strong. But Speed Stance, you don't really want to be doing that anymore. That's a really low Dexterity. Dexterity Stance is pretty good. Again, you have options. It's really not the worst for Onyx, but it is a pretty big nerf for her. Jaehyun is pretty balanced. Strength Stance may not be as worth it anymore, but Dexterity Stance also isn't bad. It's just you'll have a little less survivability, which if you can handle it, you can. That's really not a bad stance. He's only slightly affected by this negatively, but nothing too major once again. Ooh, I thought Mako was going to have high Dexterity. It's high speed she has. Dexterity Stance technically isn't a bad stance to run for Mako, but you also really don't want to be running into speed. Unless you just want the highest stat for speed, you're going to have to deal with the low durability then. But even something like Defense Stance is perfectly fine, but Dexterity Stance is an option too. It's just, she gets slightly nerfed by this. Nothing too major. Magyar also, like, he also gets nerfed from this, unfortunately, which is kind of a shame. Takes down on defense. He does have a whopping 9 defense, so, like, that's a perfectly fine stance to run into. But he also has the defense stance. Speed stance is perfectly fine. But strength stance may be the worst now because he will lose his weapon a lot quicker, and also he doesn't have the speed. So you have a lot of options with Magyar, but it is a nerf overall. You also have Reno. Very good changes for Reno. Love to see Reno buffs. I know I hate blasters, but Reno buffs are always nice. The high dexterity taking out of defense is not too bad, really. Even, like, speed stance is perfectly fine. If you want to run strength stance just to keep yourself balanced, you can. Perfectly fine stance. Just leaves you balanced on the weapon durability. So it buffs Reno, I would say, because dexterity stance is a great stance, but also it doesn't affect him if you do run it into strength stance anyways, so do with that what you will. Moonin. I mean, Moonin's just a legend people don't really even play in general. Dexterity stance could be perfectly fine if you don't really care too much about the kill power, because 4 strength is not the worst, it's just not a lot is all. Especially for weapons like bow and scythe. Speed stance obviously isn't worth it. Just Moonin isn't too affected by this, but the issue mainly lies in the stances not being very good. But overall, much didn't really change for Moonin. But then we have Arcadia. Arcadia's a very interesting one. Let's see. Because, I mean, dexterity stance, hell no. Defense stance is also, I mean, it's the one that people likely ran a lot before, but it's also a perfectly fine stance to run now. And if you don't really feel like going higher up on the defense, go down on the, like, you can go down on it too, even. It's just, it doesn't really, most of the time you're going to be running defense stance, so that's why I don't think it's a super positive buff for Arcadia. But you could even do something like strength stance or base stance if you want to keep the 7 dexterity. Perfectly fine. It's a slight buff for Arcadia. Now, Ezio needed this buff. This is something that I feel like is going to hopefully take Ezio out of obscurity a little bit. Because going down on speed, perfectly fine change, in my opinion. I would happily run 8 dex Ezio. Perfectly fine. Running down on it also is not an issue because that leaves you balanced, basically. Perfectly fine to keep balance. It's just strength and speed stance are not the greatest, I would say. It's definitely a buff for Ezio. It's a very good buff. I'm really hoping for Shell / Tezuka that this is going to be a nerf, but you never can really tell. 4 defense isn't the worst. It just makes Tezuka a little bit more of a glass cannon, but this shouldn't affect Tezuka too negatively. So still a very strong 2s pick, honestly. You just don't want to be running into whatever stance takes out from dexterity. Oh, it's strength. Which maybe people did or didn't do. Because speed, taking down a speedy defense, that's, you never really want to do that. So I could imagine people were always running strength. But that's going to leave you much lower. So it's a slight nerf. It's just a slight nerf to Tezuka. But even if you run base stance, it's perfectly fine. Dexterity isn't a horrible stance. It just slightly nerfs Tesco overall. Thea is not too badly affected by it. 8 speed is still an amazing amount of speed, by the way. Dexterity is really not a bad stance for Thea. This is an amazing buff for Thea because Thea has always been one of the worst legends in the game by far. And I'm really, really, really hoping that the dexterity changes help Thea out a little bit. But besides that, you don't really want to be running into strength anymore. If you were running into strength, it only lowers it slightly. So Thea isn't specifically nerfed by this too hard. If it is a nerf, it's just ever so slightly. But if you're running base, you're going to be fine. Dexterity is amazing. It's almost a buff, I would say. It's a nerf if you run strength stance, but it's a buff if you run dexterity stance. Perfectly fine stance to run, in my opinion. Raptor also has a solid amount of dexterity, but you're going to be a glass cannon if you run into dex stance, unfortunately. Strength isn't going to be a super great option anymore because it just takes down on your durability a little bit. Just a slight nerf, I would say, because dexterity stance isn't very much worth running, actually. Speed stance could actually be perfectly fine. So with defense, I would say. So he's not too negatively affected by it. I'd say he's actually perfectly fine. Loki. Not a bad one, honestly. That's 9 dexterity. Depends if you really want to keep your weapon that long for scythe guitars. Honestly, even running out of dexterity is a perfectly fine stance. That's 5-7-5-5. He does get buffed from this overall. That's pretty cool. Even though he's like a big sig spammer legend that a lot of people don't like, he actually really struggles higher up, I would say. We don't have a lot of high elo Loki players, so this is a buff overall for him. I'm excited to see where Loki goes with it. Ooh, wow, big nerf for 7. Holy. If you're running speed stance, then I'm sorry, but you're going to have the lowest durability in the game possible. Even strength stance is just not great. Dexterity going into defense, that's not horrible. That's 7-4-7-4. That's like, that reminds me of Barraz's stats, maybe Zariel's stats even. But 7 is pretty nerfed by this, but she was a pretty strong legend, just more underrated, I would say. But I don't know, she might not be as strong anymore. You have to be very careful about choosing your stances for 7 because it could really affect your gameplay depending on how you play. But overall, a pretty big nerf for her. Vivi. Probably a nerf. It's not by a lot. Just dexterity stance is not the greatest option, and strength, if you were taking out of dexterity before, then it's probably going to be not very fun. It depends on what your preferences are. Even defense stance is perfectly fine, I would say, because that takes out a speed. Base stance is really fine, but I don't know if you need 8 speed. She's only slightly affected by this in a negative way, but it's battle beats and blasters. I think Vivi players will be perfectly fine. She won like 2nd place at BCX, so Amugi's pretty nerfed by this. I actually am using strength stance or dexterity stance on him just to have that a lot more durability. Running 3 and 2 dex feels like a huge detriment, which is why I try to avoid it when I can. But it depends. It's case to case. I think, yeah, I mean, even speed stance is perfectly fine. Speed or dexterity is probably going to be your best options here. You don't want to run any of the other stances, I would say. But he does get nerfed pretty hard from this, so if you didn't like Amugi for 6 spam reasons, there you go. He's got pretty nerfed. He got nerfed pretty hard. Zuva, unfortunately, does get nerfed by this too. But I think strength is still a great option, while keeping some durability for his weapons. Defense, not really. If you're running speed, then that does nerf him pretty hard, so he is affected by this a lot more than other 4 dexterity legends due to his low speed as well, taking out of dex. But he still is a really underrated legend. He's a very good legend. I like Zuva a lot, personally. But if you ran into dex, you wouldn't have a problem either, so it depends on what you run, on whether it's a big change for him or a small change. Priya is an interesting one. Ooh. This isn't even a bad option itself. I think she's not super affected by the changes. I wouldn't even run speed earlier. I mean, running strength is perfectly fine. Running dex is perfectly fine. She isn't too affected by it, and that's good. I've always liked Priya. She became an instant favorite of mine, so it's glad to see that she won't be too affected by it, but if you do run into dex, then it's a buff, so there you go. Ransom, on the other hand, is a big nerf. He is affected by this a lot, unfortunately. Though he does have, he has the high strength, which is good, but the issue with that ends up being that you only have 3 dex. If you run into dex, you're going low defense, so you really can only sit around with 4 dexterity. I mean, run into That's a lot of speed. Defense or even base stance, I say, would be the best option for Ransom. But he is pretty negatively affected by this. Vera, on the other hand, 3 speed is not great, I would say. The high defense is really nice. Still leaves you pretty balanced. If you're running speed stance into strength, that's yeah, wow. Her stances are very interesting. She is overall buffed by this, which is good. If you really don't care about the weapon durability, high defense is a great option for Vera, actually. People seem to forget that even though she's a really weak hitting legend and kind of slow, she does have really high defense, and that's very good. And the dexterity is going to help Vera a lot, I think. So overall, a buff. Depending on how you play, it could just be the same if you play defense stance. But again, very good stance. But on to the final legend, we have Rupture. He's obviously really nerfed by this. If you want to run into dexterity stance, that's a perfectly fine stance. He's like, that's not too bad. It's just slightly lower than the durability amount that you would have if it was average. But speed, not going to be such a good option anymore. Even defense is just kind of bad. Strength stance is hilarious. I like how in my Rupture analysis, I said, like, speed stance is likely the most optimal because dexterity doesn't matter, but it's really not the best option anymore. That video is already outdated, even though I posted it like 2 days ago. But strength stance, fantastic option. Dexterity stance is surprisingly a pretty good option for Rupture too. But if you don't agree with a lot of my decisions on which dexterity changes are good or bad, then of course, your opinion. I honestly state your thoughts about what you think about your main down in the comments, because I always like reading the comments on these types of videos, especially with such a big rework like dexterity. But this is a very, very, very healthy change for the game. I am very excited to see where they go with the balance changes and how this is going to affect not just the ones meta, because it does affect the ones meta decently, but it's less noticeable in that mode because unarmed is so strong. But in twos, I feel like the dexterity change has potential to change the twos meta up a lot, especially if they nerf gauntlets. Nerf gauntlets to the ground, and we would have a completely unique new twos meta. I think it could be very interesting. So again, let me know what you think down in the comments. If y'all like the content, then absolutely subscribe or like the video, share with your friends. It helps out a whole bunch. And until the next one, y'all make sure to keep on brawling.